Hello and welcome to Second Opinion. I'm your host, Dr. Ebony Hilton, and I'm so glad you're joining us. When it comes to your health, one voice is never enough. That's why it's always important to get a second opinion, especially when the questions feel big, personal, or overwhelming. This show is your safe space to pause, take a breath, and gain clarity on issues affecting your body. Each week, we'll bring you trusted medical experts from across the spectrum of care, from mental health and sexual wellness to infectious diseases, from chronic illnesses to the headlines that are shaping how we live and heal. Today, we'll break down complex information, cut through the noise, and talk honestly about what it means for you and your family. Our goal is simple: to help you stay informed, empowered, and proactive about your health without fear or confusion. So get comfortable, stay curious, and join us as we take a deeper look at the issues that matter most to your well-being. This is Second Opinion. First up today, the measles outbreak. The number of cases is climbing day by day, with thousands of people across the country contracting this disease. Now, disturbingly, the CDC is reporting more than 700 cases in South Carolina alone. If you can tell by my voice, that's where I'm from, so this hits close to home, right? In fact, South Carolina has more cases in the last 4 months than the entire country has had in the last 30 years. But regardless of where you live, one thing is common. About 94% of all the cases in the United States are among unvaccinated people. My first guest today is Dr. Nisi Hudson, founder and chief scientist with the Hood Medicine Initiative. Welcome, Dr. Hudson.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, many people on social media describe the measles in the same way they describe chickenpox, right? Like it's just a rash. But is that true? What exactly is measles?
Well, I guess firstly, I'll say in terms of the the broader picture, we as a country, we eradicated measles a long time ago. So the fact that you're even asking me about this is hugely frustrating. But we know why that is. But in terms of like the effects, firstly, I think it's wrong for people to look at it as something that they should just let their kids go through. Chickenpox is kind of like that, and of course, we all went through that, but it's just not necessary. And with measles, it can be a little bit more dangerous. I mean, it starts with like a fever, normal kind of flu-like symptoms. You have cough, runny nose, all that kind of thing. But then you start getting white spots, and it could be, they form inside your mouth, like after you start getting symptoms. And then the rash spreads typically to the rest of the body. And so most people just have, maybe some mild complications like diarrhea or pneumonia, things like that. But, it can lead to complications that include like blindness, seizures, brain inflammation. And we've obviously seen many kids perish because of the unwise choices of their parents recently. So I don't ever advocate ceding any ground that the human species has made over microbes. We've studied these diseases for decades for a reason, and it's simply ridiculous to not vaccinate against them.
And you mentioned, can you help explain to the audience? You said that we nearly eliminated measles. What does that mean? What did we do to get to that point? And why are we now at the point we have so many cases every week?
Not a shocker, but we vaccinated. That's how we eradicated measles. The thing about vaccines that we've talked about, ever since our inception at the beginning of the pandemic, it's honestly your body's way of getting the intel it needs on viruses and other pathogens that you might encounter. That's what's so important about vaccination, is that, your immune system is essentially like a spy network where you have a headquarters where all of the data files and the dossiers on all the supervillains are. And when you, just like any Bond movie at the beginning, you meet this new supervillain and he starts wreaking havoc. And next thing you know, you're trying to find out, who is he? Where is he from? How do we kill him? That's essentially what your immune system is doing. And by taking vaccines, you're getting that intel before you even encounter that person. So it's extremely important, especially for things like COVID, like the measles, that can be deadly because if enough people within the population become vaccinated, then you have herd immunity, which is protective over everyone who's vulnerable or unvaccinated. So it becomes something essentially that contributes to community and public health. And since our world is so intermingled now as opposed to previous centuries, that means it impacts everyone globally.
You know, your analogy of superhero, supervillain, because that's how public health, that's how we can get messaging out, because it makes sense when people hear it. You know, and you spoke about the groups of people who are the most vulnerable. Who are those people that we should definitely say, hey, you need to get that that measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine way back when? Who are those people?
So generally speaking, you know, it's young children and infants. I'm sure we all know, because of our own experience, that you receive a schedule of vaccinations at specific times in your growth and development. And so young children who, you know, are on a first round or haven't gotten everything that, you know, an adult would be fully vaccinated against, they're vulnerable. Elderly populations, particularly those who, you know, may have not have been vaccinated for certain things themselves, but certainly just because of, you know, natural sort of physiological challenges that develop as you age. There's certainly a vulnerable population. Immunocompromised people with immune deficiency, cancer, or other conditions that sort of leave them open, more vulnerable to infection, because for whatever reason, all of those signals, all of the messaging in their bodies doesn't make it to headquarters. And if it doesn't make it, then, you know, the other thing that's, you know, your immune headquarters is responsible for is deciding which assassins to send out, how we're going to mount a response to different threats, just like any spy organization would. But when you become compromised, that's difficult to do. So they're certainly vulnerable. And I guess I would also say, because of the policy shifts of this administration that has deliberately dismantled vital public health protections, a lot of the people who are also impacted are poor people at this point, people who've had their Medicaid cut, people who are going to be impacted by all of the inane and erroneous, you know, measures that RFK is putting in place that disrupts the way that we regulate vaccine schedules in this country. And so by doing that, that means, you know, potentially schools are going to, you know, not be able to maintain the same level of protection for students. Eventually, you know, we have, you know, when you change all those recommendations, that also means that changes what health insurers are obligated to cover. Mm-hmm. So all of this anti-vax propaganda is purposeful, it's deliberate, and it's meant to disenfranchise millions of people from access to vaccine protection. And what we need to ask ourselves in these dark times is why.
You know, and that is absolutely the question I have. You know, you mentioned the HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I don't know if you saw the quote from Dr. Kirk Millian, who is the pediatric cardiologist and acting chair of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. And he's quoted as saying, and I quote, "What we're going to have is a real world experience of when unvaccinated people get measles. What is the new incidence of hospitalization and what's the incidence of death?" And that was his rationale as to why we shouldn't necessarily have to blanket vaccinate everyone, that we needed to see in real time what can measles do today as compared to 30 years ago. How does this concern you?
Well, first of all, it's a very Nazi-coded way of looking at public health, because eugenics is tucked into that. The point of that thinking, the arc of that thinking is, we don't need to protect everyone. Let's let natural selection take care of that, which I think is hugely rich and ironic, considering they have restricted breeding in our species for the last half millennia. But that's part of that ideology. Sort of, there's always an inherent element of sort of population culling and starting with the undesirables. And honestly, it's not just in the public health sphere. If you look at the way that they've disrupted regulatory agencies like the EPA and the USDA, the CDC, how we've withdrawn from WHO, all of these things have implications that that make us less safe as a populace. And that is what we look to our government to do. But with this particular administration, firstly, they started, and are continuing to erode institutional trust between the propaganda, between the measures that they're taking. When you think about measles itself, the spread of measles that we're seeing in the US is solely attributable to RFK himself. But what's crazy about it is that not only is his propaganda and impacted policy, which has made more people susceptible to measles, but his misinformation propaganda has also made it so that there's been a 39% increase in vitamin A toxicity because he's been promoting it as an unscientific alternative to measles vaccination. That's insane to me. I don't know what's happening right now. But in terms of like all of those culminating effects, you have that impact on vulnerable populations. You have a resurgence of disease, and I'm sure measles isn't going to be the only one. If you want to get funny about it, COVID is resurging, but nobody seems to care anymore. Along with other diseases have been eradicated. We've seen the plague, we've seen polio. All of these things that people should not have to even think about anymore are coming back. And a lot of the background moves that he and Doge made in terms of workforce collapse and for the HHS, in terms of research stagnation, particularly targeting mRNA vaccine development, which is critical for the bird flus we're getting ready to anticipate, for HIV treatment developments, and just even for cancer treatments. We use RNA virus technology for all kinds of things. And so they're just really latching onto this and using this as a mantle to, I don't know, ask yourself what their end goal is, because right now it just seems like a lot of people are getting sick and perishing.
Right. On a closing note, you brought up a key point of like, why are we having so much vitamin A toxicity? And I think it's because those persons, those anti-vaxxers, the RFK Juniors of the world, they have the loudest platform. And so parents don't know what to trust. So if you had a moment to speak to the parents that are listening to this show, what are the important vaccinations that you recommend the parents get for their children before they enter into elementary school? And if they haven't had it so far, to get it today?
I am so glad you asked. I mean, certainly even though, he is doing all of these things and there's all these new sort of recommendations that are being put forth, a lot of the, physician bodies like the AMA and others are still recommending that we go by everything previous to this administration in terms of vaccine schedules. So what we've all had to get into school, measles, mumps, rubella, now, chicken pox, diphtheria, tetanus, all of those things that are on the school list. And then now that we're smack dab in the middle of flu season, as it were, obviously there's always the annual flu vaccine, RSV, the updated COVID vaccine, which I would say people should definitely get because there are new variants circulating from before. And then just as a note for older Americans as well, the pneumococcal vaccine, shingles, of course, if you're 50 or older, and certainly getting that RSV is something that I think would be important for those populations as well.
That's incredible advice. And for those who need a little extra incentive on the shingles vaccine, it's actually been shown to be helpful for those with Alzheimer's disease and slowing down the process of them losing their memory. So let that be that drives you to get your vaccination. So thank you, Dr. Hudson, for joining us. You have been so informative on things that literally can impact whether or not these children and adults live or die. So thank you.
Thank you.
Now, coming up next, would you know what to do if someone you knew were having a heart attack near you? Well, we'll tell you how you can save a life. Stay with us.
I'm Brittany Noble, Midwest-born, HBCU educated with experience in newsrooms across the country. Well, I've teamed up with Roland Martin to bring to you The Breakdown. This isn't just news. It's our stories, our voice, our community. Join me for The Breakdown Monday through Friday at midday, only on the Black Star Network.
February is a time for love, but did you know that it's also American Heart Month? A month dedicated to focus on our hearts, not just for love, but to raise awareness about cardiovascular disease. And why is that important? Well, because cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death in the United States. In fact, in 2022, 941,000 Americans lost their lives. That's about 2,500 people a day, and one person per every 34 seconds dies from cardiovascular disease. So joining me now is Dr. Anthony Fletcher. He's the president of the Association of Black Cardiologists. He's going to shed some light on what can we do about our heart. So thank you, Dr. Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ebony, for this opportunity to speak with you today about a very important topic.
Yeah. So why is it so important? Why is heart health so critical to American, longevity at this point?
Well, as you mentioned in your introduction, heart disease is the number one killer of all Americans. And I say all Americans because sometimes people of color, especially African Americans and Hispanics, are not felt to have the same degree of heart disease and sometimes often diagnosed and often treated. So it's important that we talk about heart disease as the number one reason that all Americans die. And it's a disease that can be prevented to some degree. And I think that's one of the things that we want to really emphasize this month, how heart disease can be detected early. And even more important than that, how sometimes it can be prevented. And so that's one of the reasons for this discussion today.
Right. And when you mention that it can be detected, what are some of those signs or symptoms that may trigger someone to say, hey, I may need to get my heart checked out? And are those symptoms different between men and women?
Well, certainly there are signs and symptoms, although unfortunately sometimes heart disease can be silent. You may have no symptoms, and that's why it's important that we do early screening and detection, why we listen to family history and know our risk factors. But to answer your question about signs and symptoms, the most common one is chest discomfort. And I say discomfort, not always pain, because people say, well, I don't hurt, but they're heavy, they're full, they're tight, they're squeezing, they're achy. And then sometimes it may not be discomfort at all, it may be shortness of breath. It could be easy fatigue. That discomfort may be located in unusual locations when we think about heart. It could be your abdomen, it could be your back, your neck, your jaw, your arm, and even your teeth. I've had people present with what they thought was a toothache, and it turned out to be a heart attack.
Well, it's one of those things when you talk about toothaches and you talk about, chest pain, some people say, hey, when I have a panic attack, I feel like my chest is really tight. How can they know the difference? And when should it push them to say, hey, I just need to go to the emergency room or to my primary care physician to get actually checked out?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of people have chest pain. I suspect over time you probably had chest pain at one time or another. And so we just have to be, I think, aware of the fact that that discomfort may be your heart. And I think one of the ways that we can help stratify that is know your risk factors. Is there a family history, for example, of heart disease? Have you had people early in their 40s and 50s and 60s that have had heart disease? That would put you at higher risk. Are you diabetic? Are you hypertensive? Do you have a history of high cholesterol? Are you inactive? Are you overweight? Are you a smoker? All those things are things that put you at higher risk for heart disease. And then if something's recurrent, if every time you try to be active or that you're emotionally involved or you have a full stomach, you get discomfort in your chest that goes away when you relax, then that could be signs that you have heart disease. But the most important thing is be proactive. Don't just assume. If you have questions or concerns, you should go get it checked out.
Right. And what lifestyle changes would you recommend if someone says, hey, yes, I have risk factors. My mom, my dad's grandfather, they all died at early ages. They had heart failure. What lifestyle changes should they implement at younger and younger ages to maintain a healthy heart?
Well, again, I think the first part of it is to know that history. I think often we need to share family histories when we're having gatherings, whether it's holidays or, birthdays, et cetera. Secondly, know your numbers, know your blood pressure, know your weight, know your sugar, know your glucose. And know potential risk factors like smoking and perhaps even in many cases, social drug use. Those are all risk factors for heart disease. And then if that's the case, be screened. Don't wait until you have a problem. Go get your routine checkup so you know those numbers. The doctors can see if your blood pressure is abnormal, if your sugar is abnormal, if your cholesterol is abnormal. There are certain tests we can do to perhaps screen when there's some question about heart disease, such as a calcium score. That kind of gives us a way to define whether or not there are potential risks. There's a new test that's kind of evolving, still kind of somewhat under investigation, but getting your Lp(a) checked. That's a form of cholesterol evaluation that tells you genetically whether or not you have the potential for heart disease. So there's some things we can do to screen and detect early, but I think knowing your potential risk based on family history, knowing your numbers, and just paying attention to your body. Have things changed? You can't do as much as you used to be able to do without getting fatigued or tired or short of breath or having discomfort.
You mentioned knowing your numbers, and it made me think about, at CVS or Walgreens or any of these drugstores, there's that little blood pressure monitoring machine that you can put your arm in.
Absolutely.
Right. And because, a lot of people say, hey, I don't have a primary care doctor that I go to regularly. I don't have a device to measure at home, but you may be able to find one of those. If they were to use that machine, what number on that machine should trigger them to say, hey, I need to actually go and get help because this number is too high?
Absolutely. So the ideal blood pressure is 120/80. That's ideal. People who have blood pressures in excess of 130/80, we feel that they're in early phases of hypertension. So those are the sort of numbers we should look at. Obviously, if you're getting numbers of 150, 160, 170, those numbers need to be evaluated. But I'll take you one step further. I'm a firm believer that every household should have a blood pressure cuff. And every household should also have someone that knows how to do CPR. Those are two things that we can do in our homes that can make a major impact on our future health and outcomes.
You mentioned CPR, and the American Heart Association says that anyone can save a life if they know how to do CPR. Where can people go to actually learn how to do this? Are there any free resources for them?
Well, I think you can touch base with your local heart association, and they'll tell you places where CPR can be learned. Many times they have seminars and training sessions at the American Heart Association locations. There are health fairs where people learn how to do CPR. Many churches have programs where you learn how to do CPR, and organizations such as the American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, and of course, the Association of Black Cardiologists also have programs where you can learn how to do CPR. And of course, in today's world, looking at social media, you can go to YouTube and they'll show you how to do hands-only CPR. So there are many ways. And in many districts, school districts, it's mandatory that people before they graduate from high school know how to do CPR. So that's a good way to get this started.
And I think it's you mentioned a very, very kind of small point that I think people may not have picked up on. You said a hands-only CPR, right? Because a lot of times people hesitate to help because they say, I don't know this person. I don't want to put my mouth and do mouth to mouth for this person. Can you explain what hands-only means?
Hands only means you just pump the chest. You don't need to do those respirations. And, scientific evidence has shown that if you do good hands only CPR until advanced life support gets there, that patient can survive. So hands only just basically means, find the appropriate place on the chest, doing those compressions until you get further help and further aid.
And can you give the audience just what are some of the ways that you can tell that someone is having a heart attack? How can they help? And when should they actually start to initiate CPR?
Well, obviously, if you have someone that's complaining of discomfort, many times they'll be clutching their chest. They may be sweaty. They may be short of breath. They may be able to talk to you and tell you they have a history potentially of heart disease. They're basically clutching that chest, complaining of discomfort. They may become somewhat altered in their level of consciousness, or they may actually pass out. If that happens, you should feel for a pulse. The classic place to feel for is, on each side of the neck, and feel to see if you have a pulse. You want to see if they're breathing. And if they're not breathing and you don't have a good pulse, then you might be able to assume that, they're in the midst of a cardiac arrest. It doesn't mean that they're having a heart attack because other causes of cardiac arrest exist. But then you would assume CPR. And obviously have someone call 911 if there's someone there with you and do that CPR until you get some further assistance.
Well, Dr. Fletcher, we thank you for joining us. I hope our audience heard kind of key points of you can make a difference. You don't have to hesitate in order to help someone, and that you can do simple things. Just the compressions alone can help save somebody's life. Because as we stated, one person dies every 34 seconds in the United States of America from cardiovascular disease, and it can be something that you can help to reduce that number. So we thank you again, Dr. Fletcher.
You are so welcome. We thank you for this opportunity, and let's do this again.
Good. And coming up next, did you know that loneliness is just as bad for our health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day? We'll explain next on Second Opinion.
Hey y'all, welcome to The Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network and hosted by myself, Bria Baker, and my good sis, Jamira Burley. We are just two millennial women tackling everything at the intersection of politics, gender, and pop culture.
And we don't just settle for commentary. This is about solution-driven dialogue to get us to the world as it could be and not just as it is.
Watch us on the Black Star Network, so tune in to The Other Side of Change.
Former U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy published a document calling loneliness an epidemic, with 1 out of every 3 adults reporting they are lonely. And contrary to what one may think, due to the digital connections covering our social media threads, younger generations are actually calling themselves more lonely than the older generation. Joining us now to shed some insight on the root of this disconnection is psychiatrist Dr. Dawn Brown. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Ebony, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. What is this loneliness and why is it becoming an epidemic at this time and day?
Loneliness is becoming an epidemic because the way we live has changed. People are moving faster. They're on the grind more. They're carrying a lot more weight. And a lot of people are doing it alone without support. We used to have this built-in community, right? Neighbors nearby, family live next door, church members willing to help. But some of those spaces where people felt like they belonged, and a lot of that is gone now. So while people are still functioning, they're still disconnected. And when that connection disappears, loneliness becomes chronic for many people.
And you mentioned, being in a room and in churches and in these social gatherings. There's often a saying that people say you can be in a room full of people and still feel lonely. What does that mean when we see someone and you look at them, you're like, hey, how are you lonely? You're always out and about. You're always kind of engaged. Yet they say, hey, but I don't feel like I'm connected.
Yeah, so that's what we refer to as emotional loneliness. It's when you're physically present, but emotionally unseen. And we talk about always being seen, right? You know, that's when we're heard, we're being valued, we feel understood and respected and even worthy. But for the sense of loneliness, you can be laughing, talking, even in the present, showing up, but no one really knows what you're dealing with. And a lot of that is because no one's really checking on you, or you're not being open to divulge in these deep conversations about who you are and yourself and what you're dealing with. And a lot of people do feel lonely because they don't feel safe being honest. And I have to repeat that. They don't feel safe being honest about their feelings, who they are, what's going on in their life. They may feel embarrassed, even if it's outside of their control. And they feel like they have to keep it all together. And when you can't be yourself, you know, real connection just doesn't happen.
And when that happens, how does loneliness impact the body, the physical body?
Well, the body, you know, the mind always connects to the body. So loneliness affects the entire body, the whole body, just not our emotions. Our mind connects to our physical state. So when someone feels disconnected for a long period of time, the brain goes into stress mode. You know, cortisol stays high, our sleep is impacted, how we eat, how we communicate. We become isolative, our immunity drops, inflammation increases. You know, all of these are physical symptoms. So over time, that stress shows up physically in heart health, in our memory, in our moods, in our overall well-being.
You know, and in this saying of being lonely, there's certain groups of people that they are saying have a tendency to be even more lonely. Those with small children, mothers of small children, transgenders, bisexual adults. Why are these subgroups reporting more loneliness than others?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's very important to talk about because loneliness shows up in people who are under constant stress, emotional stress, or who don't feel like fully supported. And mothers can feel lonely while caring for everyone else, right? The LGBT community, individuals in this group may experience rejection or even the lack of belonging. So loneliness usually follows stress and marginalization. And that's not random. Those are factual statistics that we see in our research.
You know, one CDC survey also said that nearly 1/3 of adults said they feel lonely at least once a week. But among younger adults, that number rises to almost 50%. Are you seeing loneliness more in younger people? And why is it targeting this group? Is that every generation that the younger people tend to be more kind of lonely, or is this special for what we're living through now?
Absolutely. You know, as a child, double board certified, but I'm primarily a child psychiatrist. Many kids tell me that, you know, they're often connected digitally, you know, by text messaging, by gamings, you know, ask them what their friends groups are, their names, and they name people they haven't even met. But these are people they may communicate with through gaming. But communication is different than connection. So younger adults are more connected digitally than ever before, but most report some of the highest levels of loneliness. You know, they communicate constantly online, like I said, but many don't have those deep, emotionally safe relationships in life. A lot of them haven't been trained to do so, you know, so they're surrounded by people, but they still feel alone. You know, it brings me back to what my parents have always told me, that the best thing you can give your child is time. And they were right, you know, because that builds emotional connection, right? But it also builds safety, it builds trust, it builds a sense of belonging, which is the antidote for loneliness. So, you know, that connection is what protects children later in life from loneliness, from isolation, from believing they have to carry life alone. Basically, have a one-on-one conversation with your child. I always tell the parent, listen, you know your child the most. So you know how they're going to react, respond, you know the words to use. So let's talk about some of these things like emotional safety. The child learns that they matter that when you're spending time with your child, you're telling them that you're worth slowing down your day for them. When you're building trust, they believe you'll show up, and you're not just saying that you will, you're actually in the present. Attachments, for example, that kind, of attachment regulates the nervous system. It also lowers anxiety. And you're there to care for your child. When you see them lonely or maybe feeling down or depressed, you can actually respond to that. It actually builds self-worth. Children internalize time as being valued. Right. Not just gifts, that puts a smile on their face, but when you're really there for them and you're listening and you're learning more about them, that actually brings self-worth. And then you're teaching them, you're modeling communication, you're modeling what it means to have these deep, meaningful, sometimes hard to discuss conversations about whatever's going on in their life. And that actually means that they're being emotionally held, if you will. But it also builds resilience. And I have, little, thoughts of resilience. I don't think we should be resilient. I don't think our children should be resilient because that can be very tiring. But I will say that in order for them to survive certain parts and aspects of the world we live in, secure connection becomes a buffer, right, against stress, against loneliness. It teaches them how to manage periods of anxiety and future mental health struggles. And then sense of belonging, again, that's the antidote to loneliness. So when you belong to something, you feel like you're being valued, that you matter.
And what if you're a person that says, hey, I don't feel like I belong. I don't have a community around me. I don't have one single person that has hugged me in the last 10 weeks, much less a year. What do you say to those people, and what's the first step they can take to start, broadening their community or seeking help? What should they do?
Interestingly, I say the first step is to say it out loud. And I know that can be tough for people, but when you hear your voice and your brain hears it saying that I am lonely, something in your brain, changes. And, I would also say that the first step is actually spend time with yourself, not necessarily people. And that matters when we talk about self-care. So, during the time of the pandemic, that was very meaningful for me. I had never been to the movies by myself, a restaurant by myself. I'm a single person. So I was spending a lot of time in the house, with dogs who can't talk back, right? But there was a sense of loneliness that might, that started to creep in. But that's when I realized, that I really needed to understand who Dawn was in this moment. And what was my purpose in life? Was that repurposing things? Was that, going to, for me, my Lord and Savior, just to understand what I should be doing. And that's when I started a business. And so, self-care matters. Being by yourself, I feel it starts there. But also, you don't need to have a big circle. People think that to prevent loneliness, you need all these different people in your life. You just need one safe connection. And so if it's one person, one place where you don't have to pretend to be yourself. When you can show up as your authentic self and that's accepted, that's received, that's understood, that's welcomed, then that's a sense of belonging. And it also is not built fast. It's built slowly. So it's built with time. So we want to be consistent with those connections. We want to make those play dates. We want to go out with our girlfriends. We want to go out with our intimate partner. Those things have to be consistent, and you have to always be willing to be your true self. So don't be afraid to be who you are.
Mm-hmm. And for those who say, hey, at this point, I'm willing to even look outside of the human realm, right? I saw an ad for a AI digital relationship or friendship that you can have buddies. Is that something that you're seeing in your line of research, of where people are turning to computers for companionship?
I am. I actually had to hospitalize a teenager because they were using AI as a intimate partner. Now, intimacy is different. It doesn't necessarily have to be physical, but this person was relying on AI emotionally. AI can show up at any moment. You can even tell AI what to tell you if that is going to meet your needs. But the bottom line is that that's not human. So when you're talking about AI, they're always going to give you the right answer, the justified answer. They're not going to necessarily make it to where we have to talk about the tough conversations with the level of emotion. AI lacks the emotional part. And if you talk about loneliness, as I said before, it's the emotional capacity to show up and connect with someone else. So when we have AI and the lack of emotion, then that's the problem, right? And that can become something different for people. So this person just started relying a lot on AI. They were missing school. They were missing time with their people that are in their life present. And it just became depression for them. And so, that's like a severe, kind of example. But yes, the AI actually has become something that's, because it's not regulated, many people depend on AI for different needs. And so what I say again is that it's human to have emotions. It's human to have tough conversations, human to be able to be yourself and express your emotions. Because again, when you have a sense of belonging, that means it's less likely to present a situation where you feel lonely, but you feel understood and accepted.
Well, our thoughts and prayers are definitely with the young one that you were just speaking of. We at Second Opinion know that this topic is more than just a segment, that it's a reflection of people's lived lives, and that level of loneliness can carry a heavy cost. In fact, in 2020 alone, the United States had one death by suicide every 11 minutes. And for people aged 10 to 34 years old, suicide remains a leading cause of death. So if you're in need of help, know that you are not alone. If your situation is life-threatening, please call 988 in the same way that you would call 911. 988 will connect you immediately to a crisis specialist, and it's completely free of charge. And with that, we want to thank you, Dr. Brown, for sharing with us. You've driven home the point that mental health is physical health, and that undoubtedly will save tremendous amount of lives. And we look forward to having you back soon.
Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
Coming up, do you remember your mother always telling you, take your vitamins? Well, we'll tell you why that phrase is so important next on Second Opinion.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
During the winter months, it's important more than ever to build a strong immune system to fight off colds from COVID to the flu. But what if you're not getting enough vitamins from the foods you eat? Should you be taking vitamin supplements? And if so, which ones are right for you? Joining me now is Dr. Breanne Standifer Barrett, a medical advisor for Black Girl Vitamins. I like that, Black Girl Vitamins. How are you, Dr. Barrett?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. And what's the importance of taking these vitamin supplements? Why should people invest in vitamins?
Yes, so I think as you led with, a lot of our food that we're consuming is just not fortified enough with the vitamin D, with our multivitamins. And so we need supplementation, not just from needing your essential vitamins, but also from the foods we're getting. Like a lot of our fruits and veggies aren't staying on the vines long enough to even get the nutrients that we need. So supplementation becomes really, really important.
And which vitamins would you say are definitely, this is a mandatory, you need to take this every single day?
So definitely a multivitamin, because again, the multivitamins are your essential vitamins, which means your body can't make them. So you have to get them from another source. And you need the vitamins for the normal processes in the body to work most effectively. So a multivitamin for everybody, for sure, every day.
And what are the best vitamins during the cold and flu season? Like we're in the middle right now of winter, everyone's getting snow. What should they be taking to make sure their immune system is as tip-top shape as possible?
So definitely the vitamin D3. A vitamin D3 is one of those overlooked vitamins because aside from being a medical advisor for Black Girl Vitamins, I'm an outpatient internal medicine physician as well. So I'm seeing these deficiencies in real time, and people don't normally get the vitamin D level checked. And so when you live in the northern states, the vitamin D levels in that demographic of people are a lot lower. Although in my opinion, a lot of us are actually indoors, whether we're in Michigan or whether we're in Florida. So being indoors and not getting that sunlight, you need the vitamin D, because 82% of Black women are actually deficient in vitamin D and don't even know it. So that's a really, really big one during the winter months. Can help with the immune system, can help with the way you feel, your mood. I think zinc is also a really good nutrient to take to help kind of fight off some of these bugs and things that are floating around. And then we also have a sea moss as well. Sea moss is also really good to kind of build those nutrients up to help your body fight off some of this stuff going around.
And when you're talking about the different vitamins, can I take them all at once? Like if I'm taking iron and calcium and, if I take it all at once, does it mess with the other, or am I safe at that point?
Yeah, so some of them, I usually tell people to separate, because one, you also want to make sure that the meds that you're taking don't conflict with the vitamins that you're taking too. Because you know how some medications, like if you're on a thyroid supplement, that has to be taken at the beginning of the day. So you kind of have to look at what you're prescribed to take. And then in terms of some vitamins need food. So your multivitamins always suggest taking with food. So before a meal. Vitamin D is always good with a food supplement, because it's like it's a fat-based or fat storage-based vitamin, the vitamin D is. So that one is really good with food. But I tell people to kind of separate them out, because sometimes even with the iron, when you take the iron, it can interact with certain things and worsen constipation. So you sometimes have to play around with what you're taking, what levels you're trying to get, and your home medications that you're on.
And if you take a multivitamin, can you stack other vitamins on top of that? Or is there ever too much of a vitamin?
So what I usually tell people is first always start with getting your levels checked, because, vitamins and things are really big in our world now. And I think it's great, but it has to go hand in hand with your levels, because people can just buy a vitamin from wherever, right? Start taking it and they don't even know if they're deficient or not. So it's always good to start to see where you are first, to even know if you should be on that supplement and for how long you should be on it for, based on your baseline deficiencies. So technically, yes. So for me, for example, I do take a multivitamin in the morning with my D3, and I also take it with an iron supplement. So I do take all three in the morning for myself, but I also look at how I'm feeling on them too. Because some people, they get really, really sick if they take it on an empty stomach. So, your body needs some food with them. So definitely it's an individualized situation.
Mm-hmm. And for our male audience members, are there any vitamins that they specifically should be investing into?
So again, I start with the multivitamin, and then just like women, they can have the vitamin D deficiency. I think a lot of it's focused on women, but men are vitamin D deficient too. In fact, I think men should take beets. It helps with muscle building. It can also help with helping your blood pressure lower if it's safe for you. So beets are a good add-on. That sometimes they come in a vitamin, sometimes they just come in a liquid that you can drink. But I think beets is a under-recognized value for men in particular.
And how about our kids, our little ones? Should we be putting them on vitamins early? And if so, what age should they start, and when should they transition to more of an adult concoction?
Yep. So I always base it on levels too. So even with the children, based on what they're intaking in their diet, a lot of kids don't eat or are very picky with their diet. So I do think that young children should be on a multivitamin, because every age has like a recommended daily value that you should be getting. And it depends on the type of diet that you're consuming. Just not just multivitamin, but kids are indoors all day too. So then I argue that they should also be on some sort of vitamin D regimen, because you typically can get it through milk, and if you're a milk drinker, you'll get it fortified through your milk. But there are a lot of children who cannot tolerate milk, and so they're missing that vitamin D piece. Iron is something else that we're missing, because again, that picky eater, you get your iron from your veggies. And so if you're not a veggie eater or have a picky kid that's not a veggie eater, you definitely need some level of supplementation. And I generally say, as when you go through the aging of puberty, when your body's using more nutrients, that's when for me, and I don't treat kids, but that's when for me, I'll ask for another deficiency panel so I can see where my kids are and make sure I'm keeping them where they need to be during those growing years of puberty.
And Dr. Stanford Barrett, can you speak particularly to mothers? Women in pregnancy, we're literally growing a person, right? And if you continue on and you breastfeed, you're now giving all these calories and all these, vitamins through your breast milk to your baby. What happens to you at the end of that journey, right? What happens to the female body? And what does that lead to in women as they age?
So definitely depletion, like you said, like you're literally giving your soul to this baby. And then also if you're working, so if you're under chronic stress, so now your body may have more inflammation in it as well. But I always tell my patients, especially when they're in that nursing phase, to continue on with that prenatal vitamin. The prenatal vitamin has a higher level of folic acid, which when the mother is developing the baby at birth, that neural tube or that brain tube needs folic acid to develop properly. And so you need that during pregnancy and during development, and also during your lactation time. I also recommend continuing that supplement as well. And then if you notice, when women breastfeed their children, a lot of the recommendations say that the child themselves should also get vitamin D supplements as well. So the baby should get it if you're nursing, right? Because they're not getting the formula with it fortified in it. And definitely the breastfeeding mother should also get it as well. So I think that's also a critical phase that we kind of miss, if I'm being honest, if you don't have the right person hearing you in the office. But a multivitamin, or if not prenatal vitamin during the lactation phase, and then that vitamin D and calcium.
And then, you oftentimes see these IV clinics, right, where you can go and get vitamin infusion, vitamin B12, right? How are those effective? Should we be doing the IV version? Should we just do the pill version? Should we do both? What's your opinion on that?
Yep. So I think it depends on tolerability. So on my training, oral intake is much better than anything going intravenously. But you have different conditions like pernicious anemia, where your B12 levels might be a little low, which means you cannot absorb through your gut the B12. And so you need it through an IV or through an intramuscular injection. So it depends on the person and what other issues they may have. Like people with conditions like celiac disease, there's an issue with absorption at the level of the gut. And so that person may need an IV supplementation. But I think for me, and what I tell my patients, oral is best. If you can absorb it through gut, that's going to be much better than getting it through the IV.
Well, Dr. Stanford Barrett, we thank you so much. And I definitely agree with you. You definitely get your levels checked, people. There's now been this kind of wave of vitamin A toxicity due to RFK Jr. Recommending vitamin A to all these folks. And unfortunately, there are certain vitamins, A, D, E, and K, that you can actually have a little bit too much if you're overdoing it. So get your levels checked. But taking your vitamin every day is crucial for a healthy, long life. So thank you, Dr. Stanford Barrett, again. And we look forward to having you back very soon.
Thank you.
Now to a topic that is near and dear to my heart as a new mom of identical twins, breastfeeding. Because someone's got to feed these kids. Oh, the joys and the pains of motherhood. So come back and we'll talk all about it.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Now to a segment that's extremely personal to me, the joys and pains of breastfeeding. I am the proud mom to a set of 7-month-old twins, and my number one priority is to ensure they are well fed. Having healthy babies is the goal, but breastfeeding isn't for the weak of heart. And when you have 2 mouths to feed, let's just say you turn into a cow. Breastfeeding is a beautiful bond between mom and baby, but it comes with struggles such as painful or cracked nipples, improper latching, breast engorgement, low milk supply, plugged ducts, mastitis, you name it, right? And it could be stressful and painful for new moms. Well, joining me now is LaShonda Dandridge, a postpartum doula and a lactation educator, and also Dr. Tori Prothero Wiley, a postpartum and mental health expert. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Now, LaShonda, let's start with you. What are the benefits for the baby and for the mom if she is breastfeeding?
So there are tons of benefits. Probably I can take up the whole show, right? Because we're always continually learning about human milk and how it's beneficial to both parent and baby. But the initial things are, for baby, it's their first food, right? So colostrum, which is your first milk, hopefully those of you out there have heard that term before. Colostrum is actually extremely important for us as humans, right? It coats our intestinal tract and really seeds the gut to start taking on good bacteria. And if you think about it, this is what we're going to do for the rest of our life. So in that sense, it's really you're helping to really lay a good foundation for your infant's health and eating habits down the road as they become a child, as they become an adult. For the mom's body, I like to say breastfeeding, the state of lactation, is really the completion of pregnancy. The hormones that help us get pregnant, the hormones that help us sustain a pregnancy, the hormones are the same ones that help us make milk. And it really completes the pregnancy. It's what helps the uterus get back into place. It's what helps you flush out all that extra blood you don't need, right? Studies have shown that down the line, what can prevent us from getting the reproductive cancers. So again, I would probably take up the whole show with the benefits to both the infant's body and the mom's body.
Yeah, you speak of all those benefits. Is this if you breastfeed for 2 weeks, for 6 months, for 2 years? How long should moms try to breastfeed? I'm asking for myself.
So with that, it's always a personal choice, right? But we know that, again, this is because, we like to study everything. The studies have shown that the longer you breastfeed, the longer your body is in that lactation state of making milk, the benefits compound and go on for life. So meaning, like, if you do have a child or twins, right, you do have your first pregnancy, you are breastfeeding your baby, or again, making milk, and you do that for 6 months, 16 months, right? You have another child and you do that for 6 months, 16 months. All of that time that your body has been in that lactation state of making milk, those hormones coursing through the body, the longer you do that, the better, not better, the results last a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm. And what are some challenges that you see or you hear from women that say, I wanted to do breastfeeding, but I'm just having a hard time with it. And what can they do to be more successful?
So I think the essentials, right? If you Google, right, when you put in like, what do I need to breastfeed, or what are the essentials, you're going to get a bunch of products, right? So I'm not the product girl. Those things can be helpful, but what I find is extremely helpful in helping parents and the whole family, right? This is a whole transition to parenting, right? And your first thing that you're going to do for your child, as you mentioned, is, you want to feed them and nourish them. And so we have to learn how to do that. We come in society right now, it's not really talked about prior to us having a baby. Sometimes, I get a lot of clients that have never even held a baby, or have never seen breastfeeding. So this is new to them. So ideally, if I could, change the world and have everyone, what can we do to really ensure a successful infant feeding pattern down the line, is take a class, really start talking about these things pre-postpartum, right? So we don't want to do it as the baby comes out to say, okay, show me what I have to do, right? So making a plan, we hear a lot, nowadays about a birth plan. I really talk to people about making a postpartum plan. And one of the first things that you're going to do is, how are you going to feed this baby? And especially if you want your body to make milk and continue to make milk and provide your milk to baby, you really have to understand how the body works and what is normal human development. So it's not just your body behavior, but what is baby's behavior? Mm-hmm. And so I like to say it's both of you coming together. This is the first thing that you're really going to do as a team,
Yeah. And it's one of those things of when you're trying to coordinate 1 or 2 or 3, however many babies you have at the moment, and trying to coordinate their life, it can cause you to be so stressed because you want to do what's as best for your baby as possible. And you feel like, am I failing at this? So how does stress and other ailments play into a part of being able to breastfeed just in general?
Well, just stress in general, you can probably talk better to this about how cortisol shows up in the body, right? But I like to just break down things in, the simplest of terms. And I tell people cortisol, when it's in the body, ramps up in the body, like what we need is oxytocin, right? Oxytocin, it's that love drug, right? It's what helps bond us to our baby, right? But oxytocin has a job, and its job in making milk is that we need it to be high in the body. So that's what actually contracts and pushes milk out to baby. But if we're stressed, right, cortisol is rising, oxytocin isn't really going to rise. It's going to take a step back. And so then we can have milk supply issues and such. So it's stressful, right? But, there's good stress, there's bad stress. We don't want the bad stress of, again, having those cortisol levels rise. Stress in the sense that, yes, this is something that I really want to master. I really want to be able to provide milk for my baby. But that good stress is going to help you or encourage you to reach out and get support, right? It's going to take a class, right? Reach out to a lactation consultant or get a doula or even talk to a friend and join a group so you can really figure out what's happening, right? And it doesn't tip you over into the bad stress.
You bring up a great point about just finding help because you are a brand new mom. Like this is not something that you can necessarily just pick up on the go. So how can they find those resources? What is the go-to space for them to figure out how they can get their support system?
I think the first step is reaching out to your community, whether that community is your friends, right? People who have had children in the past, and what do they do? Again, sometimes we don't really talk about these things until we're in it. So reaching out to friends, reaching out to family. And then the next step would be reaching out to your medical community, right? Because that's who you're interacting with, especially in the time of pregnancy. So whether it's your midwife or your OB, they should really have resources for you. Reaching out to your insurance panels, right? There's a section in there on postpartum services, right? And lactation being one of them. So reaching out to those sources. In the world of social media, we do have, and I'm sure once you type in, that you're pregnant, the algorithm catches on and starts sending you different things. So you can start by looking at social media in the sense of like looking at mommy groups and things like that. I say that tentatively because sometimes those things can push us over the edge as well. But those are places to start when you're thinking of like what support I'm going to need. What do I even think about like really feeding? When I think about feeding my baby, whether it's, by breast or pumping, like it can start to help you narrow down a plan, right? Which is what we really need, a plan.
Right. LaShawna, you bring up a great point about social media being a double-edged sword because when I first started breastfeeding, I would watch all these women saying, oh, I'm an overproducer. And I was, we delivered at 35 weeks. I wasn't producing nearly any milk. And then you fast forward to now and I produce about 2 liters a day. But that stress though, the stress of not knowing if I was going to have enough milk to feed my children, it really did start to do a mental wear on me. And, this is a great time to bring in Dr. Torre. Breastfeeding, like we stated, it's not just physical, it's also mental too. And how do we see this stress playing into even postpartum symptoms? How does it lead into things like postpartum depression and psychosis? And is this something we need to be watching out for?
Absolutely. I have quite a few clients actually right now going through postpartum. And one of the first things I talk to them about is having an ability to lower their overall stress. Many are first-time mothers, and when we have first-time mothers, a lot of times we may not have a wraparound support. We may have lived out of town from family, or we may be a single mom as well. And so I talk a lot about doing things to relieve and reduce stress. One of the first things we talk about is getting fresh air, getting outside, allowing yourself to center yourself when you're starting to feel overwhelmed, as well as what she was speaking about what the doula is reaching out to friends and support groups with anxiety, that fear of I'm not being a great mom or I'm not doing this right, rather than understanding this is a first time experience. So let me reach out to the women in my circle that are mothers that I feel like are successful mothers, so that I can get some advice from them. And also just to have an ear. Many times a lot of postpartum is resolved by just being able to sit down and talk and cry and get your emotions out. So one of the things I talk about a lot of times with my clients is let's just take this hour initially to just feel what you feel. Many times we're so busy worried about the feelings that we don't perform as well as we would like to, because we're trying to stifle or we're trying to negate what we're actually feeling.
Wow. And it's that stifling process, or I guess being vulnerable enough to be able to look at yourself and say, I don't have it all the way together. And so how can moms, those people who don't have the ability to be as forthcoming with their emotions, how can family members recognize signs and symptoms that, hey, mom may be struggling a little bit, and not that she's weak, but that she just needs help? What are some of those signs and symptoms of someone suffering from postpartum?
Excellent question. I always talk to my clients pertaining to their husbands. Sometimes I actually have their husbands come in as well to join in to get education on this. When a mother is sleeping a lot, and I mean, like, not because she's losing sleep, but because she doesn't want to fully engage with the child, that's a huge telltale sign. A lot of crying, like consistent, frequent crying, having issues with temperament, sometimes snapping, sometimes not talking at all. Those are all great examples of how it shows up initially. Also, a lot of times the withdrawing and the isolation. Sometimes the mothers will be very, extroverts and outgoing prior to delivery. And then after delivery, they just want to be left alone. They want isolation. And then also sometimes too, looking at their diet. There's a very strenuous way that women breastfeeding have to eat. And sometimes women get angry about their bodies and they don't want to eat the way that they're supposed to eat. And so all of these things are little telltale signs for fathers or people in your circle, like what's going on, isolation, oversleeping, or not getting any sleep and becoming very wired, so to speak. All of these things are great ways to kind of see a shift in the person's overall personality.
Yeah, for certain. Thoughts and prayers to my husband, because I know how I've been there. And how do you erase, like I said, earlier in my journey of breastfeeding, I really struggled with being able to produce milk. How do you erase the stigma for those moms who say, hey, my supply never came in? And how do you make sure that they don't feel like failures as a mom?
One of the things I suggest for most mothers is to start with a group. There are a couple of groups, Shades of Blue, which provides weekly virtual support. And then there's National Black Doulas Association, where they can go and reach out to people that have, expert in these fields. But I think mainly is to get them to understand that every individual is different, which means that every pregnancy is different, which means that every baby is going to be different, and that you have to give yourself patience and time. I tell them all the time, I tell my clients all the time, this is temporary. You're going to, there's a learning curve, and you're going to learn this just like every other mother walking. And so reach out again to your circle, but also really focus on getting some support from people who are also struggling in the same time as you. So I think a lot of these support virtual groups are really helpful because it lets women realize I'm not in this by myself. There's some woman in real time going through exactly what I'm going through.
Right. And, and on the other end of that spectrum, for those moms that are breastfeeding, you stated earlier, or it was stated earlier, how there's benefits if you do this for years, right? But we know that life continues and you have to work, and you have to travel. How can society do a better job of embracing breastfeeding moms to actually give them the resources that they need and not have to lug a duffel bag with us every time we want to go out the door?
Well, personally, I think, we've got to change the whole understanding in Western society around motherhood and how we don't embrace, we don't celebrate mothers. We celebrate the birth, or the new individual, but we do not celebrate what this woman goes through. And so I do think that legislation has to change and that corporations have to change in their focal point about how they will take care of a woman returning back to work, or a woman who has decided that she, needs to work virtually. Maybe she's going to work at home and work in the office, where currently what I'm hearing is a lot of corporate jobs are pulling people back in, demanding that people come back into work actually, instead of having virtual access. I think all those things just as a community help. I think also having, long time ago, don't want to date myself, but I remember when there were actual daycares inside of corporations and businesses. All of those things have changed. And I think those things actually help the community, and it definitely helps support the mother.
Right.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, certainly.
I would say also the stigma about breastfeeding, in public, like you said, and if you're someone who chooses that you do want to latch your baby to your body and you want to go to the park or you want to go to a restaurant, right? And the stigma around, opening up your shirt and attaching your baby, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone has, we use the breast to sell many things in our culture, but when it's used for what we actually, as mammals, are supposed to use it for, now everyone has something to say, right? So just taking away the stigma that, when I'm out and I'm sitting at the park, I can, no one believe us, right? Those of us on here that have breastfed, it's not like we want to be like, woo, it's like we just want to feed our baby. Our baby just wants to eat. It's not anything lewd. So I think starting there, right, just taking away that stigma of that breastfeeding is a quote unquote natural thing that happens. And, having women be able to walk out of the house and taking that stigma away, where you don't always have to bring a bag and pump, because that's a whole nother, right? A whole nother show we can go into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's also the stigma of just not being back to your pre-pregnancy state in all aspects of what that looks like, right? In medicine, I'm an anesthesiologist. And so literally for women, 6 weeks after you had a baby, we don't do any elective surgery until you at least hit that mark. So, and because we know your heart, your lungs, your kidneys, your body is still adjusting to the fact that you just created a whole new person. Mm-hmm. So in keeping that in mind, that you are not the same as you were before, what suggestions do you give to supportive family members, to partners? How can they best support new moms through this transition from baby being out and now all of a sudden everyone's like, okay, she's done? How can they be more supportive in that transition?
So I definitely talk to my mothers about giving themselves time, and also talking to the husbands about, hey, go for a walk with her, give her time to get back to herself. So let her have more sleep. Let her have more time to exercise, support her, exercise with her, and then also tell her how beautiful her body is because of what it just did. I think, unfortunately, we're so focused on what it was rather than what it has provided and what it has given. Our bodies are to give life. And so many times we miss that meaning that this woman just produced and brought forth life. Let's celebrate her body at every stage. And so I think it's imperative that our support system, our husbands, our partners understand that this is a temporary situation, but it can be a prolonged situation. It can take 2-3 years for some women, depending on hormonal shifts, depending on motivation, depending on if they're dealing with a mood disorder. And so just to give them time, to give them supportive language, affirm them. A lot of times after a woman has a baby, everybody's ooh and on over the baby and the woman feels left out. Remember to give a compliment. Remember to show her significance in this process.
Yeah. I know there is probably our audience of women who have now paused this and replayed it so that their partners can listen, because the two of you have given them validation for how they feel, and also a step-by-step process of how they can make it through this new journeyhood of motherhood. So I thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I look forward to speaking to you all in future shows.
Thank you.
Up next, I'm sharing my prescription of the week. Stay with us.
I'm Brittany Noble, Midwest-born, HBCU educated with experience in newsrooms across the country. Well, I've teamed up with Roland Martin to bring to you The Breakdown. This isn't just news. It's our stories, our voice, our community. Join me for The Breakdown, Monday through Friday at midday, only on the Black Star Network.
So strong doesn't mean silent. We were taught to be tough, to handle it, to keep it moving, but nobody taught us what to do with the weight. For a lot of men, strength has meant silence. It's meant pushing through the pain. It meant carrying stress in your chest, your shoulders, your jaw, and calling it normal. But your body keeps score. Men are less likely to go to the doctor, less likely to talk about stress, and more likely to die earlier from heart disease, stroke, and untreated conditions. Not because you're weak, but because you've been taught to be quiet. Stress doesn't disappear just because you don't speak it. It turns into high blood pressure. It turns into poor sleep. It turns into anger, fatigue, headaches, and heart problems. Your body hears everything your mouth doesn't say. Real strength isn't pretending you're fine. Real strength is checking in. It's making the appointment. It's taking the walk. It's saying, I'm tired without the shame. You don't have to carry everything alone to be a man. You don't lose power by protecting your health. You extend it. Because being here longer for your partner, your kids, your people, that's strength. Strong doesn't mean silent. Strong means you last. And that, my friends, is my prescription of the week. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next week on Second Opinion.